Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. And Teo, I've been wanting to do this for a long while, and finally we're here. I've had the joy of knowing you for about 2 years now, if not a little bit more, and really appreciate the work that you do. But even personally, um, really love you personally for the man that you are and the way God shines His light through you, and the work that you do really saves lives. Um, Before we get into our conversation, I want to share a little bit of with everyone what gospel echo is. Matthew 24:14 says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." There is no doubt in anyone who knows Scripture and anyone who is alive in Christ, who understands the kingdom of God, that this world is in birthing pains. Our eyes right now are in the Middle East, but really this war is always on. It's been, and today we're going to focus on Latin America. But he says in the gospel of the kingdom. What kingdom? The kingdom of Jesus Christ. That means the rule of Jesus in our hearts. How can it be proclaimed if it's not acted upon, if it's not lived out? And this is why Gospel Echo exists, to encourage the church to live out the ruling, the kingdom of Jesus at home, at the church, and in our civic duty. So EKO stands for Ecclesia, Kybernesis, and Oikos, family, government, and church. And so today we have a great opportunity to learn. I think some of the things that you've been doing for a while, Teo, really most people don't know anything about. We see an influx of immigrants from Latin countries, and we kind of vaguely know why they're coming. It must be bad out there. But I think God has positioned you in a way to shed a little bit of light, and then that we may understand more clearly what is it like, more in the area of freedom and religious freedom. And before we get into the actual topic, what moved you to get into this kind of work that you've been doing now for a while? How long have you been working in efforts like OAA? How did you land here?
Thank you. And I want to say that I do have some opening remarks, which is to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It is truly a privilege, a personal privilege, that you're here to share my life. I've been doing this for over 30 years. We've been focused on Latin America because that's our backyard. And we have seen the terrible things that have taken place in our backyard, particularly in Cuba, later in Nicaragua, and subsequently in Venezuela particularly. But all of Latin America has some form or another of religious freedom restrictions that the governments have felt free to exercise. Perhaps not to the degree that Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela does, but enough that it has compelled me to sit down and tell the story. I can tell you what you said a minute ago is absolutely the truth. Even though we live in Miami or we're in South Florida, people just don't know the impact, the effect, the tremendous amount of restrictions and violations that are taking place in our backyard on freedom of religion in Latin America. In fact, when you think of Latin America, you don't think about violations of freedom of religion. If we talk about violations of freedom of religion, immediately you think of Saudi Arabia, perhaps China or North Korea, or some of the countries where they're cutting people's heads off and so forth, because they go to the extreme on the issue of freedom of religion, and there's no question that they are abusing minorities, religious minorities in their countries. Myanmar is an example of one of those countries where they literally cut the heads off of people who are Christians. Cuba doesn't do that, nor Nicaragua, nor Venezuela. What they use is very strategic Machiavellian approaches to restrict religion and to force themselves upon the people that are trying to operate religious organizations. Likewise, it is often that we hear that people say, look, what's your agenda, Teo? Because we go to Cuba, we've been to Cuba, and we've seen worship services, or we are Catholics and we go to a mass, or we do the same thing in even Nicaragua or Venezuela. Well, freedom of religion is not just worship services. Freedom of religion is much more than just attending a worship service. Freedom of religion involves a fundamental human right of individuals to be able to exercise or not exercise their freedom to participate, to advocate, to pray, or otherwise to be part of a religious group. That includes being able to teach your children at home your religion, being able to perhaps proselytize, tell your friends about your religion, being able to speak about your religion, or to publish or write perhaps on social media now, or give out some form of a newsletter or whatever you want about your religion. Those things cannot take place in countries like Cuba and Nicaragua. And in fact, in Venezuela, which is a new country in terms of the impact, the tremendous amount of impact on freedom of religion, what we're seeing is a government that just doesn't care. They'll walk in the middle of a mass and they'll arrest a priest because the priest was saying something what they consider to be political. Well, what's happening is that they consider anything that is being said by an individual of a religious group to be anti-government or related to freedom, for example, to be an anti-government speech, and therefore they take action related to that. And it is because of that, and much more that we're going to talk about, that I felt compelled to write a book to tell the story of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, and to tell the story of the defenders of freedom, many of which are in those countries and have advocated against what we're talking about and ended up being in prison. And they're in prison because of their faith, even though, and I'll use this word again, Machiavellian, because the government uses Machiavellian approach where they never have religious prisoners. Even at the highest level in Nicaragua, where you have a Catholic bishop that has been placed in prison, the government doesn't refer to that person as a religious prisoner. What they do is they twist and they find a commercial, a criminal angle to what they have done in order to be able to place them in prison. Thus, for example, in Cuba, if you build a church and you start having worship services in that church, and the government and you don't register the church, and by the way, it is impossible to register a church in Cuba. Let's start with that premise. So because you haven't registered your church, which you can't do anyways, you're put in prison for not registering the church, which you can't do. But if that doesn't work, they'll put you in prison because you illegally build a building without a building permit. And of course, you can't get a building permit if you don't exist. And this is the kind of approach that takes place in countries, in a country like Cuba, where they have an organization called the Office of Religious Affairs. The Office of Religious Affairs is something that was used back during Mussolini in Italy. It's an approach to have the religious groups be totally controlled by one entity. That entity, in the case of Cuba, reports to the highest level of the Cuban government, has absolutely no appeal. There's no appeal to their decision making, and they control every aspect of the church in Cuba. And when I say every aspect, everything from permits to fix a church, permission to perhaps open the doors on Sunday and have loud music, extend out, or have a foreigner come in and preach, or get a visa, or have a foreigner visit, or have any kind of activity other than the activity of having a worship service, a quiet worship service that doesn't involve other churches, because that's also illegal in Cuba, being able to coalesce and bring and create an alliance of churches. That's not permissible. Everything has to be seen and evaluated by the Office of Religious Affairs, the ORA. It is so effective of a group that controls the church, and I encourage you to read about the Office of Religious Affairs in this short book that I published, because I have a lot of examples and a lot of details about it. It is so effective that now the government of Venezuela has said, aha, this really works. And they have named the son of the president of Venezuela as the vice president of the Office of Religious Affairs, and they just created the same entity in Venezuela to do exactly the same thing that they were doing in Cuba, because godless people will do godless things. The wicked copies the wicked. And that's why we have the second component. We talked about the fundamental rights and human rights, but the second component that Judy was talking about during the introduction of the biblical examples that we have, the biblical reasons why we need to defend freedom of religion is spelled out in various scriptures that we need to pay attention to. When we look at and forgive me for reading, but we look at, for example, in Proverbs 31 verses 8 or 9, and I'm reading from the NIV, which says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the right of the poor and the needy." There's no wiggle room here. The Bible is absolutely straightforward. There is no, but in case you feel more comfortable sitting home on Sundays and and drinking tea, you don't have to do it. Or in case you feel that maybe that's too, you may consider that to be political, or somebody may consider it to be that political, then don't do it. Or in case you're doing something else, don't worry about it. It's absolutely a direct mandate to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, and for the rights of the destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And if that's not enough, then we read in Psalm 82 verses 3 and 4, and I'm reading from the ESV, which reads, "Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked." And this is what hits me the hardest in our ministry, in the work that we do. Deliver them from the hands of the wicked. To us, there's no wiggle room. To us, what Cuba is doing, they're being headed by the wicked. What they're doing in Nicaragua is headed by wicked people. And what they're doing in Venezuela is headed by wicked people. And this wicked, we can't let the wicked win.
That's right.
We're called to action. We're called to take some action. And I don't know if the action is to tell your friends to speak about it, to read about it, and then therefore write a letter, and to keep track, to learn about those that are defending our right, and get engaged in that effort. And by the way, I don't give you, as my friends, any wiggle room either, because when you read if you grab a book, you're gonna get the story, specific story of some 16 to 20 defenders who are in prison or otherwise in great need because of their of defending freedom of religion. And I give enough information that if you want to help one of them, you should adopt one of them.
Right. Thank you. I can say I was born in Cuba, and when I was a kid, I wanted to play in the marching band. I imagined myself marching through the streets of the town where I grew up with my classmates, doing the parade. So I tried out for the band, and I was told I just wanted to play the cymbal, the I was told I had no musical talent. My brother, who is as talented scientifically as I am musically, wanted to enter into the School of Science, the Lenin School. His grading was 98.7 or something like that for math and physics. His application was rejected. There were too many people at a specific service on a Sunday night, and people were looking in through the church's windows, standing on the street, enough grounds to stop the service. Pastor, you need to accompany us for interrogation. So we're just kids. And my brother's nickname in the town was Pastorcito, little pastor. And I'm the other Pastorcito, right? So when I try to be in the band, I'm not allowed. My brother can't go in science. There can't be too many people at church. That was just like my experience. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of stories for the last, 5, 6 decades. Just so we're clear, you're talking about Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. We know that those 3 countries speak Spanish. But what else do they have in common? What do you think, what would you group them together? What makes them, how do they end up in the same pile of nations that experience religious oppression?
The first thing I think that brings them together and that puts them in the same boat is that these are countries that have run away from everything that is godly. Everything that is godly. In the case of Cuba, they actually created a constitution where they say that said in the constitution that it was an atheist country. The Constitution of Cuba said, we are an atheist country. We hate religion. We combat religion. That's how they started out as a country, running away from everything that was godly and fighting everything that was of God. Since then, recently, they changed that and they became a lay or non-religious country in the Constitution. They modified it. But this is the base from which they have grown, and this is what we're seeing, and this is what, and these are how is manifested by what we see in Cuba. In the case of Nicaragua, we see something very interesting, something very similar. The government creates basically their own religion. They connected and create a version of religion that includes some evangelism, some Catholic, and some of their own inventions with flowers and fruits and and all kinds of things, to the point where the vice president of the country, which many believe that she runs the country, the wife of the president, is called La Bruja, no? So the witch. Because everybody expects that everything that she does is implored and supported by the occult. This is where what drives her, and how is that manifested in that country? Very similar to in Cuba. They first began manipulating the church, first by becoming very friendly with the Catholic Church and claiming that they are a strong Catholic and attending masses and so forth. But when they passed a law that was not favorable to the people in 2018, and on Social Security, and the people go into the street, and the government goes out and starts apprehending and killing and pursuing young people on the street without any controls. The Catholic Church reacts to that and begins to take on many of those young people into the church and trying to defend them and protect them and hide them in the church. The government didn't care about that. They actually went inside the churches and took out the young people and took them out and sent them to prison. This created a huge problem in the country, and it will be a turning point in the relationship with the Catholic Church, and I'll come back to that in a second. But what did they do? That didn't work. We're now going to become friends with the evangelicals. And so they went and they said to the evangelicals, we're evangelicals. We believe in Jesus. And so they went and they told them, and we're going to give awards to all the pastors when they graduate from seminaries, and we're going to provide all kinds of assistance to the churches that are friendly to the government. And unfortunately, many of the evangelical churches loved that and thought, this is wonderful. We're not political, therefore we're going to accept the favor of the government, and we're going to do whatever the government says we need to do. And as long as they leave us alone, we're going to get funded. We're going to get awards. We're going to be able to bring in humanitarian assistance in the form of containers when we need to, and so forth. And the church, and so what they did is they took the evangelical church and divided it right in half, right, to the point where half the evangelical church in Venezuela supports the government and half the church does not support the government. And forget about the Catholics. The Catholics are persona non grata. They don't exist anymore. The government has gone to war with the Catholic Church. They have thrown out every single Catholic group that you can imagine, the Jesuits, the nuns, the Vatican, the representative of the Vatican, everybody's thrown out of the country. And now they're starting to confiscate the seminaries and the universities and take everything away from the church. Over 1,000 organizations, religious organizations, have been shut down by the Nicaraguan government over the last 365 days. It is a travesty what's going on in Nicaragua right now. It is absolutely an attack against the Catholic Church over there now, and of course half the evangelicals. But talking about similarities, then the Venezuelans have seen what happened in Venezuela and Nicaragua, and they go, whoa, this is wonderful. Look what, they were able to successfully be able to divide the evangelical church. And so the Venezuelans do exactly the same thing. They create a council of churches, which they call a council of churches, which if any visitor goes in and says, okay, this is the church. No, that's not the church. That's the church that supports the Venezuelan government. And so they have right down the middle divided the evangelical church, and they do it exactly the same way. They say all those churches that are in support of the government and don't speak badly about the government and just focus on your worship service on Sundays and Sunday school and leave us alone and don't ask for anything, don't pretend that you're anything other than just a church that meets on Sunday, and that includes broadcasting, writing, whatever, education. Please, you guys are going to get supported by the government, and they pay them. They give them they pay the church. They pay the pastors a monthly salary or stipend to help them, and they pay the seminarians and recognize them when they graduate, but not the other evangelicals. They're not really, they're anti-government, so we're not going to support them. In fact, we're not only going to not support them, if they try to bring humanitarian assistance into the country, as many of us have tried to bring in humanitarian assistance, they won't allow it. They just won't allow it. Nicaragua is doing the same thing. They just won't allow it. And you know how Nicaragua gets away with it? To talk about Machiavellian. What they do is if you bring a container of food to Nicaragua, you have perhaps, I don't know, 300,000 packages of rice that you want to deliver. First, they tell you that the rice is not allowed because it hasn't passed the inspection, even though it's rice that comes from the United States already in packages. But if you even get through that, then they want to know who's going to receive the packages of food. 300,000 packages of food, and they want to know every single person's name and contact information that's going to receive the food. Well, it's impossible. You can't do it. You're going to go into the field. You go to the communities. You take the elderly, the children, the destitute, the most vulnerable people in the communities, and you bring them in and you feed them. And in some cases, you do it in feeding halls where you use the food and then you provide for them. It is impossible to tell them every single package where they go. So then they say, well, you're breaking the law. You're not telling, you're not telling us who's going to get this. Therefore, you can't have it. And eventually we'll confiscate it and we'll take it. And it will become ours. So God, the lack of God is what constitutes what's exactly what brings them together, what connects them together, and this is I would say that's the main reason.
But what is the political ideology, just so we're clear, that those three nations have in common?
Absolutely, all three of them have the socialist, communist ideology behind them. That is what drives them. That is how they think. That is what they have brought to the table. And that's why communist China and Russia and Iran are such strong allies of these countries. In the case of Cuba, we know the story. Many of you know the story. Cuba, after the U.S. embargo, went went for assistance to the Soviet Union at that time, and became part of the Soviet bloc, and all their trade, 100% of the trade of Cuba, after breaking relationships with the United States, what became Soviet bloc trade. Cuba would do something, you know how the Soviet Union worked, is that some countries had were very good at some things, perhaps some agricultural product or some material or some equipment, and Cuba was really strong in sugar and perhaps some other coffee, and so they traded amongst each other. And this is how the Soviet bloc felt that they were going to strengthen and maintain stability in terms of trade. Now, the fact is, as you know and as you read, the equipment that was being built was very bad. So many within the Soviet bloc had to go out of the Soviet bloc in order to buy Western products, in order to be able to to do well. And in the case of Cuba, it was a tragedy because Cuba was built around the Western culture. The railroad system has the same rail system as we have here in the United States. The ports were built by the United States. The airports were built by the United States. So ultimately, all the replacement parts and equipment had to come from the United States and the West. And so they couldn't, you could try to manipulate it and do some things to try to keep it together, but you couldn't. And so the country just absolutely, fell apart. In the case of Nicaragua, the strength of their relationship with Russia right now is at a peak of a level. The Russian has been permitted to be able to bring warships into Nicaragua and visit and have, in fact, given statements of support to the Nicaraguan government, and it is known that Nicaragua has been working very closely with the Chinese government in order to build perhaps another canal to compete with the Panama Canal. If you've been following what's happening in Panama, the Panama Canal is having all kinds of problems, so it encourages the building of this new canal in Nicaragua. But we can talk about that for 10 hours, because in order to build a canal in Nicaragua, you have to steal the land of all the farmers all around the area, which they're doing, and in some cases, in really hard ways. They know how to do that.
This is fascinating. It's a whole world of complexity and details. And I think it's important for us, I don't know if you guys think, but it's important to know how deceitful and how technical language and how, the schemes of how to control the people and how to, ultimately govern and rule over the will of the people as gods, right? Let's bring the conversation for a couple minutes to our homeland here, to the Christian sphere, why programs like this ones are necessary, and faith and freedom, though in America we don't have as many declared instances and situations, we feel it. We feel well, I think it was in 2016, it was a New York Times article stated that there's no room for Jesus in the public square in America anymore. Now the next battleground, at least for me as a pastor, is in the church with Christians. We are here to be the salt of the earth. We're here to be the light of the world. And there is this conflict between our faith and what we believe, and how engaged should we be with what seems to be a political sphere. How do you see it? Why is that? You've been a believer for many, many years, decades now. From your lens, coming from the battle and dealing with attorneys and trying to get prisoners out of jails in all of these countries, when you look at the church as a believer, but when you look from your angle this way, what is this conflict? What is this? You call it, I heard you say it was a dance, but what is this? Can you speak into that? Why do Christians have such an issue with speaking about social matters?
This has been one of the difficult subjects in the church around the world. In overseas, what we see is that they use control of the people as politics. In other words, the governments that we're talking about think it's political if you're encouraging people to do anything other than what the government wants you to do. So any control, any loss of control is a political statement against the government. So that one is more clear. It's harder here, I think, because I think that we have a tendency to confuse politics with politicking. And we think that getting involved in politics implies that we are politicking, and politicking is bad and dirty, and everybody, and I'm not going to vote for anybody, and everybody cheats, and everybody is bad, and therefore I'm just not going to vote again, or I'm not going to get involved in anything having to do with politicking. But this is not, that's not what we're seeing is that the politics, if we don't get involved in politics, we are giving room to the devil to do what he wants. We are basically, well, not me. Billy Graham said this. Let me just read you this. Evangelist Billy Graham boldly proclaimed the necessity of moral courage to uphold Christian values in society. His words bear witness to the critical need to defend the virtue of justice, honor, and righteousness. The Christian is to take his place in society with moral courage. Stand up for that which is right, just, and honorable. And then he goes on to say, nowhere in the Bible does it teach that we are to withdraw ourselves from society. Rather, it teaches quite the contrary. We are to join with others who are working to good purpose to help lift the unfortunate. In other words, Christian involvement in civil disobedience signifies resistance against oppressive authorities, coupled with a readiness to bear the associated consequences. And many of us, that's it. That's what draws the line. We don't want to deal with the consequences of getting involved. And the consequences may be very simply, you go to a party that you were invited to, and there are 5 couples there, and they find out that you are a Christian, or you stand for a certain for certain Christian values, and you hear some of the others says, "Ooh, these people are really far right. They are." They accuse you of being now associated with the Speaker of the House because he is, he's an evangelical nut, or they say that you're a Trumpist, or they invent some words to separate you, and you don't want to go through that because now all of a sudden you're not part of the couples. You're not in the kitchen eating peanuts. Now you're sitting by yourself in the living room, just twiddling your thumbs. So, and this happens. This happens every day to all of us. Yeah. And we say we don't want, hey, I don't like the consequences of that. Some of us have it even worse. I mean, I see Mary over here. Mary works at FIU, and try dealing with college students on these issues that we're talking about. It is hard. It is hard to go in every day and say, I stand for that for which Christ have put me here for Christianity, for the values of Christians. It is hard to do that, but we're called to do it. And this is why Billy Graham, I think, says, we have to have the moral high ground, and we have to live by the consequences, and we have to do it.
Politics is policy, and policy has only to do with people, right? Psalm 135, I think it says, let all the peoples praise you, O God, let all the peoples praise you. The peoples of the world are created by God. They are endowed by their Creator. How can Christians not engage in those conversations? How have we lost the battle, or even the moral authority to say, I will speak and my voice will be influential, and I will occupy space in the debate, and I am a bearer of truth and of light wherever I go, and I will state what is right and why it is so. Why have we lost, and how have we lost the ability to do that? That's the kind of church, that's the kind of people that made this nation free. Only Jesus sets us free and allows us and facilitates for us to build a free family and a free town and a free city and a free state and a free nation. How have we lost that as a church? Where and when did we learn to be silent and quiet and to love niceness more than the truth, more than what is right? How do you see it?
Ooh, it's above my pay grade, because I tell you, I think I keep thinking we're becoming wimpier every day in this whole area. I live in a cocoon with a whole group of defenders of freedom that see things that are amazing every day, and that motivates us to do more things. Today I was supposed to be in Geneva, and I sent Mari Carmen, one of the members of our team, to Geneva. And the reason she's over there is because we're still advocating for freedom of religion in these countries, even though the United Nations elected Cuba again to be on the committee, on the Human Rights Committee. So the Cuban government is making decisions that say, hey, we have freedom of religion at the highest level at the United Nations. But then you say, well, who elected them? Well, it was the other governments that elected Cuba to the commission. After groups like us and 1,000 other groups have been telling them and showing them and giving them testimonies and giving them cases and absolutely documenting every single violation of freedom of religion that these people have done. But what happens is this: the Cuban government has a group of diplomats in the United Nations that are sharp, good-looking. They speak 3 and 4 languages, every one of them. They will do favors for the other governments, and the favors that they do is they, if England wants to pass some kind of a environmental resolution in the North Sea that, for their benefit, and they need votes, they actually go to the Cuban diplomats and they say, hey, would you guys vote for us on this? Yes, we'll vote for you on that. So then, and then the Cubans take on leadership in various committees. And let me tell you, they are the sharpest diplomats in the United Nations right now, are the Cubans. And so they manage to, they focus in areas that they can manipulate, and it is in that game that they play that they get away with this, because the obvious question is, why do governments allow the Cubans and the Nicaraguans and the Venezuelans to do these things? Isn't it obvious to them that they're breaking every single rule, including the universal the rules on human rights? So why don't they tell them to stop it? Well, they basically tell them to stop it. But they don't, but they have to be very careful because they need the Cubans to vote for them on some other issues. Now, that's not the Christian world. We almost have to navigate and step away from that and say, that's politicking. We don't get involved in that. We are over here. We have to go by the mandates of what the Bible tells us that we have to do. And we'll continue to advocate, and we continue to get in the faces of these people and tell them the truth, and we'll continue to support the efforts of the prisoners and the defenders of freedom. And I tell you, we have 12 different prisoners, both in Nicaragua and in Cuba, that, you know what the Cuban government and the Nicaraguan government does? They make the prisoners work. They do different things for, in the case of Cuba, it's agricultural work. They go out and they're working 8 hours a day outside, and they're doing all kinds of things. But the government can't pay them for working. And they're supposed to work for their own food, and oftentimes don't even have water. So how they pay them is they say, okay, we're going to let you go home for 2 or 3 days during the month, and then you can, the more you work, the more you can go. So oftentimes they're home for 3, 4 days, and they immediately call us, and we're engaging with them, and we're trying to figure out how to provide help. Breaks our heart, breaks my heart, because inevitably every one of these prisoners, when they come out of the prison and they're home and they're trying to get some re-energize themselves a little bit, take a shower and get some food in their stomach and so forth, and we call them, and of course we call them to pray with them and encourage them and so forth, and we always ask, what can we bring to you? What can we get you? What can we get you to help you when you go back to prison? Inevitably, every one of them, besides asking sometimes for powder to kill some of the bugs that are in their beds and things like that, they say, please try to give us some form of New Testament or Bible or verses that we can bring to those that we're sharing the Word of God with inside the prison. It is amazing. Every one of them have a ministry inside the prison where they're teaching and they're talking to other prisoners and bringing them to God. And when the government says, you can go to the river to get water, fresh water, because they usually don't have fresh water, so they bring them in pails that they let them go down to the river and get it. Say, brother, thank God this week we were able to go down to the river to get a pail of water, and we took 2 of the guys that came to Christ and we baptized them. And I mean, it is amazing. And you just cry and cry and cry and cry and cry when you talk to them, because that's what they do. That's in their heart. They're not politicking. They're not even in politics. They just want to preach the Word of God freely. And this is what those governments are not allowing these people to do.
So I think we're clear that there's a difference between political engagement and politicking.
Yes.
The dirty part of which, and that dirty part, we can do it at the market. It's sin. Mm-hmm. It's lying, it's cheating, it's manipulating. We should not do that. But engaging in our civic duty as citizens of this nation is important. Speak to us a little bit about civil disobedience. At what point, in your opinion, or as you understand it, at what point do Americans, okay, maybe speak to the crowd here, do we consider such a thing? What is that bar? When do we hit that line where we say we will honor God first and not the state? Can you speak into that?
I didn't know you were going to ask this question, and so I just want to make sure that you know that I perceive that you may ask this question. So I just want to, if you'll allow me to, I want to read something that I prepare for that. Because taking an inspiration
this is a delicate topic. You have to say this perfectly.
Yes, it is delicate. Taking an inspiration from Thomas Jefferson's conviction in his divine calling, as reflected in his powerful words, which he says, resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. We understand that succumbing to or serving such oppressors constitutes an act of defiance against the highest authorities, the King of Kings. He says, underlying this viewpoint, 4 essential tenets of Christian civil disobedience are presented. 3. 1, Christians should resist a government that mandates or strives non-violently within the law to change a government that allows such actions. 2, civil disobedience is warranted when the government's laws or orders blatantly contradicts God's laws. And 3, if a Christian disobeys an unjust government and cannot escape jurisdiction, they should accept the government's retribution. So the last 2 points, I think, are critical to what we're talking about. Civil disobedience is warranted when the government's laws or orders blatantly contradicts God's laws. And Thomas Jefferson is not the Bible, but I think there's a biblical a context here that you can't escape from. You cannot, if we see God's law being violated, we as representatives of God here on earth, as the need to take action.
Resist.
And so that resistance, we need to act.
Right.
Otherwise, we're back to Proverbs 82 when we talked about let the wicked, are we going to let the wicked triumph and succeed while we're sitting down? And then we're going to do exactly what the church did in Nazi Germany. And they're going to say, we're not political. This is, they're doing something out there. They're doing stuff. They knew exactly what the Germans were doing. But the church, the Christian church in Germany, chose not to get involved because they said that was political, and allow what happened in Germany. And I don't have to tell you what happened in Germany, the destruction, the death, that took place in Nazi Germany because the church did not get involved. And many, many Germans, soldiers and officers were part of that church and were members of that church. I'm not talking about, what you see in the movies, the soldiers and the officers are over here, and then you have the pastor of the church and a few people from the congregation over there, and they're the ones that were involved. All of them were not involved because all of them were part of the greater church, the Christian church, and the church did not get involved. Are we going to be the same?
I know you're a big fan of Jen Haas and others. You want to share a little bit of some of the things that you find useful, some of those anchors, like the quote from Jefferson is very valuable. What are some ways, or can you give our audience point us somewhere to begin to form our own value system as believers? At what point enough is enough? At what point do we depart from living peaceably and honoring the king and praying for the governors? How can you, beyond this conversation, point some of us towards understanding this idea of civic disobedience as believers?
Well, I think you said it there was when you call them anchors. We have plenty of those examples in the Bible, and that you constantly preach about and teach us about. We have plenty of those in the Bible of the anchors, of those that stood out, that become our example. But if that's not enough, simply in our lifetime, as we have seen and we look, you don't have to go very far. Almost everybody knows the story of Corrie and Betsy ten Boom in Holland, and how those two women confronted the Nazis because of their faith. And their faith is what, did they survive? No, they didn't survive. They were sent to a concentration camp and they both died. But their story resonates with all of us, and it's a form of an anchor that we can follow. And like them, we can look at all these examples that we've had of tremendous defenders of freedom that have been before us, that we can use as anchors to imitate, to emulate, to teach one another, and to use them as examples of of others that have gone ahead and defended the freedom. And many have been burned at the stake, and some have had their heads cut off. And, we don't have to go to those extremes, and we won't go to those extremes. But, but, but we have to be willing to pay the price at the parties and these other places and use them as the example.
So how can we be defenders of freedom? Well, I'm going to say one is to get your book, right? And I think I heard you say this morning that every book that is sold, you're donating the proceeds to Gospel Echo.
Every book that is sold
Today.
we're going to.
So we'd like to sell about 200 books at $1,000 each.
Yeah, and if I don't have enough books here, we'll order the books for you. The books are available in your favorite bookstore, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and so forth. And just last week, it became available as an ebook. So I immediately downloaded it to my phone. In fact, I was going to use it as my cheat sheet over here to try to copy it. But it's good. And if you're like me, you hate reading, so you want an ebook so that you can take the page, highlight it, and then put the speak button on, and then let it speak to you.
That's good. That's good. But what are some practical ways? And I think we have about maybe if you guys have questions or things you want to dig a little bit more into, what is it like to be a Christian in Latin America, especially these three countries? How do we wrestle personally with the liberty that is given to us by God to exercise our faith, to make personal decisions in accordance to what God says? What are some ways that we in Miami, we Americans, or us in the West, can do as defenders, practical ways that we can join you in your fight of being a defender of freedom, of religious freedom?
Well, I think that, obviously, every one of us, and I have to say it, even though I know I don't have to say it to this audience, is we have to pray about this situation. As confusing as the presentation that I just gave you, as convoluted as it was in terms of what happens, how these governments do what they do, it brings to task the fact that only God can solve this whole problem. And in order to do that, we need to be in prayer. And so please add this issue to your prayer list for every morning. I implore you. It is important. And also, but besides that, depending on where we are, we have, I think, all kinds of opportunities to either talk to your neighbors, to write the letter, write an op-ed, share it with your friends, tell it at those parties.
Run for office.
Run for office.
Local, everywhere.
Yes, and this is this is an important one. And I know you had a speaker on this issue earlier a few weeks ago. But run for office. How many? I won't do it now because I think my ministry is all set. I'm advocating in a different way now. But I write an op-ed on the Miami Herald every 30 days, sometimes 2 times a month, and it's always about freedom of religion. I'm always advocating for that. But that's where God has placed me. And I'm not saying I'm important or I'm cool or anything else.
You're both.
I have that. I have that. I have the ability to be able to know the editor, and they know that this is something I write about. And so, and I can do that. And perhaps Mary will invite me to go to the, to the big party at FIU and speak to the leaders of the youth movements, the youth groups, and share about this. But all of us have different opportunities to talk about it.
I believe so. I believe that God gives all of us an opportunity, but it begins with a personal decision. You have if you make the little decisions on choosing. I was speaking on Thursday here at the Christian Act for the Jewish people, and I said, what does it mean to stand with Israel well, in your conversations, don't be ambiguous. See it clearly. I mean, you can watch thousands of shows and debates right now. They put someone, a pro-Palestine and an Israeli, and they're both tone deaf. They're all repeating. They're hopeless. They're repeating the same thing. But you, Christian, you have a clarity. You have understanding. Would you voice it? You have a circle of influence. Will you choose to season your words with purpose? Will you use that opportunity for the glory of God by speaking truth, by being by doing your role? When you speak, words are powerful. I just came back from Barcelona, and I was talking to friends of mine and leaders and pastors, and everything over there is between the left and the right, as if that is of any consequence. Both of your political parties are socialist. Both the Socialist Party and the Popular Party, they're both socialists. They're like, what? Well, observe what they do. They act like socialists. They think that they are God, they are the solution. They pretend to distribute wealth from Catalonia down to Seville. They're both socialist. It just threw their mind upside down. What is the solution? What should you do as a Christian? So here's some things. Make the small decisions. Engage in the conversation. Most Christians don't have models of believers that speak this way. They leave that for a certain politicized Christian. We just, we're Psalm 23 Christians, and we're John 3:16 Christians, and the most serious ones that go into a couple of Ephesians chapters, and that's it. We don't really know what it's like to voice that there's a king inside of us that pleads for the freedom of every soul that he created. That there's a king inside of us that is reconciling them to set them free, that they will know the truth. That there's a way to live that he can offer. But he has placed us in the United States of America, for example, or in other countries where there's more freedom to plead for those who don't have it. To plead their case, like how you're doing, bringing to us and to those who will watch this show. For those who don't have a voice, for those who have never known that it is possible to speak your mind, that it is possible to worship your God with liberty. You know what I mean? And so we can all do that. The same way that we complain or we just say how bad things are, can we turn that energy into something that's constructive, instructive, inspirational, setting captives free, showing the truth for things, And then obviously pray, but we must engage. We must do our part. And I believe that every single Christian, God is giving an opportunity to make a difference. To make a difference of politicking, never. Jesus will never call us to politicking. But Jesus will always walk into the scenarios where darkness is of every sort, and in this case, political, and speak truth, and speak freedom, and speak life, And so I think we can all do that. All of us have a chance, whether it's someone in the marketplace, a cousin, someone we're texting with, or the great opportunities that God has given you throughout in different parts of the world. I'm always, every time I think of you, I am honored to know you and to call you friend. Because, you guys don't know this, but just in 2022, you guys, how many meals did you serve just in 1 year to a handful of nations?
10 million.
10 million meals, okay? He's not telling you a lot of the things that they do. How many religious prisoners have I met? Some pastors, some Catholic priests. Just give me a number, more or less.
About 15.
Out of prison, out of jail, from here, advocating and meeting with people and talking to counsel and legal and doing all that process. Imagine just one is worth it. One father, one pastor who has a flock that is waiting for him, that's waiting for their shepherd, And so praise God for you, for the work that you do. We're very proud of this work. We're very proud to be walking together. You're a champion of this cause, and your example inspires us. So thank you for taking the time to share with us a little bit of what you do to try to make a little bit of sense of, just like you said, it's so convoluted, it's so complicated how, even the people that we think that are on our sides, like the evangelical Baptists, for example, no, they're actually sold out and they're part of the problem. All of those complexity, thank you for bringing a little bit of that truth to us this evening. And thank you again for sharing a little bit of all that you know and all that you have experienced and all that you have done.